with subsection B, which is freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression. Now, there's one piece that I left out. Does anyone know what piece I've left out of this part of the Charter? And it's the thing that separates Canada from the United States in a very meaningful way. And it's this sentence: subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Your rights as Canadians can be abridged if it is decided that they are unreasonable exceptions or unreasonable accommodations in the conduct of a free society. So you have the right to freely assemble. You do not have the right to freely assemble in the middle of the street and block traffic. You can't say, I have the right to assemble and I chose to assemble here and you can't do anything about it. Those kinds of rights can be abridged and have been abridged and are abridged all the time. But what it means is that your freedom of thought and belief and opinion, those are in your head. You can't really abridge. We're not going to start punishing thought crime. But expression is a behavior, and that kind of behavior can be abridged, and it's written into the Charter, which means that there's a lot of exceptions of times when you are not allowed to express your opinions. Yes?
I just wanted to say that one of the things I find lamentable is this, that hate speech, and I'm quoting here, is defined as any communication that disparages a person or a group on the basis of some characteristic such as race, gender, ethnicity, nationality, religion, sexual orientation, or other characteristic. Or other characteristic, that's like the notwithstanding clause in Trudeau's stupid amendment to our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It takes what was a clearly framed legally defensible criteria, and it put in this wild card of other characteristic. Now
we'll get to the criminal code in a second, because when we define hate speech, that's a very important point. Part of that has to do with that thing about sexuality wasn't originally in the Charter. You used to be able to discriminate against people based on their sexuality. It was totally legal to do so, and that other characteristics was added at the same time as the sexuality clause, because they were leaving a door open for other groups that may become identified, such as trans people, who may not qualify under which should be covered under gender, but isn't really. So there's a current, I don't know if anyone knows what the resolution of that was, or if there has been a resolution yet, whether or not transgender rights have been actually written into the Charter yet, or whether that's still up for a court challenge. But that was a recent issue that the federal government has, because they are not fed trans people. Anyway, so what is hate speech? As you saw hopefully read for us, according to the Criminal Code of Canada, section 319, everyone who, by communicating statements in a public place, incites hatred against any identifiable group where such incitement is likely to lead to a breach of the peace. So this is a specific behavior as laid out in the Criminal Code of Canada that qualifies as hate speech. So speech saying, I don't like vegetarians, is not hate speech. Speech saying, vegetarians are cockroaches, they're scum of the earth, and they should be run out on a rail, may qualify as hate speech, because you are talking about a specific incitement of hatred against a particular identifiable group. Now, it doesn't take a legal expert to realize that this is an incredibly weak statement, because it does not actually define hate, it doesn't put parameters around incitement, and it leaves it well open to the individual judgment of jurists, which, I mean, we call them judges for a reason, but anyway.
One question, what is a, quote, breach of peace defined as? Is that like something else in the criminal code, like it being broken? Or?
It may in fact be. There is a law specifically referring to disturbance of the peace, but something tells me that it is left intentionally vague, because there will always be arguments about what qualifies as breach of the peace and what qualifies as speech that other people don't like.
So it hasn't been defined somewhere else?
It may have been, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Would it be likely that it just means breaking the law of any sort?
You can breach the peace without breaking the law.
Yeah.
So,
but wouldn't that still be legal then?
you get into a circular argument at that point, because then this would say you can't, it is against the law to do something that breaks the law. And that is yeah, it's not really a useful statement, but your point is well taken. It's not a, I'm going to try to get through this. The debate will happen, but I want to get straight to the end so we can actually drill down on some of the stuff. Second is that everyone who, by communicating statements other than in private conversation, willfully promotes hatred against that identifiable group. So if you have a newspaper that talks about vegetarians as being scum of the earth, then you've communicated an idea. If I'm talking to Mav and I say, you know what, Mav, those fucking vegetarians, man, they're ruining everything. And Mav's like, I know, right? If you'll excuse me, I'm going to eat my tabbouleh. Then, you know, Mav's a vegetarian, and I like to pick on vegetarians because vegetarian is an Iroquois word meaning bad hunter. Anyway, there is a proviso here. And it says explicitly in the criminal code, it refers back to the previous slide. Although some of this section infringes the right to freedom of expression as guaranteed by Section 2, it has been ruled that it constitutes a reasonable limit on that right and therefore, and has a lot of case history behind it. So this has been the way that the criminal code stands now, even though it is a violation of Section 2 of the Charter. The Supreme Court and the lower appellate courts have ruled that it is a reasonable infringement on your right to expression. You're still allowed to express yourself, you're just not allowed to do it in such a way that incites hatred against people. Now, this is important because I don't want the conversation to get dragged off into completely irrelevant topics. There are some things that are not hate speech that no free speech advocate, such as myself, would ever defend and say this is reasonable free speech. No one would. Only a crazy person would. I'm not talking about specific incitement of violence against specific groups. So if you go out and say we should burn the heretics, that is not free speech. That is an incitement of violence that has a separate legal statute that's attached to it. That doesn't qualify. That's not hate speech. That's incitement of violence, and that has a completely different meaning. Personal attacks against individuals that are clearly, someone get that? I think someone's trying to. Personal attacks against individuals that are clearly motivated by that individual's membership in a specific group. So if I'm out in public and I start screaming at Mav, you fucking carrot eater, you know, that's not free speech. That's verbal assault, and that's not what we're talking about. Although the content of the speech is still hateful, we're talking about an individual attack on a person based on membership in that group. That's not free speech. Again, that has a different definition in the criminal code. So I don't want to get talking about, well, what about people who, you know, kick someone and call them this and that. That's not what we're talking about. And also speech with the specific intent of stripping a group of human and or civil rights. So people who say, you know, gay people shouldn't be allowed to get married, or women shouldn't be allowed to vote, or black people shouldn't be allowed to ride hot air balloons. I'm not referring to that kind of speech, because at that point what you're talking about is institutionalized discrimination against a group. You're not expressing an opinion. You are advocating a specific legal action against a particular group, and that's not hate speech.
Wait, so can I clarify something here?
Yeah.
Because there is a difference between, like, for example, this came up in the discussions of the Genocide Awareness Project,
Yeah.
where they're actually advocating something that, like, so the Genocide Awareness Project is advocating that women shouldn't have the right to abortion, which in Canada is considered a human right.
Yes.
But they are within this, like, statute of, like, legal protected speech, because they're not actually advocating, like, measures to strip women. They're just making a moral argument.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between saying, like, black people shouldn't be allowed to ride hot air balloons, and saying, like, let's do something to prevent black people from riding hot air
Exactly.
balloons.
So saying that it is dangerous to the health
Yeah.
of, you know, good Canadians that black people are flying overhead, racing in their hot air balloons with the systems bumping and the hydraulics on them. that's stating an opinion about a matter of public concern.
Right.
Saying therefore we should take away their ballooning licenses we're now getting into a separate argument, and I don't want to go down that road, because no one would say that that's okay to do. It may be to say, you know, people who have glaucoma shouldn't drive. It is discriminatory in a way against people with glaucoma, but we're no longer talking about targeting a specific group and taking away their civil rights. We're talking about this is a danger that we ought to address, not a specific, these people shouldn't be allowed to do things. So here's the question that I would like us to discuss there, the question that we are here to discuss, is should hate speech laws exist in Canada? Hate speech laws do exist in Canada, have existed in Canada, and carry the force of law with them. So whether or not they exist is not a relevant question, because they do. Spoiler alert. I guess I should have said that first, eh? So the question is, should they? Is it a good thing that Canada has laws that outlaw hate speech? So there are some questions that sort of go along with this. The first is that the question of, do hate speech laws work? Do they actually protect minority groups, or do they simply drive controversial ideas, unpopular opinions, into the underground? Any of you who have spent any amount of time looking for really hateful, racist speech, even in Canada, it's really not hard to find. Even if you just go on the rants and raves section of Craigslist and just poke around for 5 minutes, you're going to find some really, really outrageous things that people wouldn't say out loud in front of their friends. And the question is, does the fact that hate speech is illegal actually does it actually do what it's supposed to do, which is to reduce the amount of hate? As a minority group, are atheists, agnostics, and humanists more likely to benefit from legal protection, or are we more likely to be prosecuted for speaking out against religion? Because criticism of religion, as we've seen with Geert Wilders, can be seen as incitement of hatred.
Yes. Question: does Canada's hate speech laws include any TPM restrictions?
So you're going to define TPM?
Time, place, and manner. In other words, in the States now, the current trend is to set up what they call euphemistically First Amendment zones, free speech cages, protest zones. In other words, you can say anything you like, provided it's in a remote, isolated place where the media cannot report on your speech.
The criminal code specifically makes exception for private conversations between people. If you overhear a private conversation, a person can't be prosecuted for what you say. But I don't know that that specifically covers hate speech. I don't know that there's any place where you can stand in a particular zone and start railing against the Jews.
What I mean is that, say, in London, for over 100 years, there has been a tradition of free speech that there is, in central London, Hyde Park, and there is one corner of the park called Hyde Park Corner, where you can take your soapbox along, you can stand up on it, and you can say whatever you like. But it's not illegal for you to express those exact same opinions anywhere else.
Right.
You're not automatically in breach of the law if you choose not to use Hyde Park Corner. Whereas the TPM restrictions say your free speech is virtually unlimited within these carefully sealed off zones. But God help you if you say the same thing where it can get on C-SPAN.
I've only ever seen those in the context of political protest. I've never seen them in the context of hate speech.
They're popping up all over campuses in the US and in Canada, I believe.
Okay.
They say, just for the sake of not offending people or not causing a fuss, make sure you only do your protests over here in the quad.
And
so
again, that seems to refer to the manner of speaking more than the type of speech.
Yeah, that's what you're.
So I'm not. I don't know that really applies to hate speech laws unless you're having a hate speech parade. Which, hey, I mean, you laugh, but there was one in Surrey, I think. Was that Surrey or Burnaby?